Well, a lot of people don't really realize the status of Chernobyl at this point. It sort of faded into the memory banks. I mean, the explosion and meltdown was back in 1986. At that time, the city of Pripyat had 46,000 people, workers and families that were working at Chernobyl. And on the late April, when that explosion occurred, they didn't evacuate everybody out right away. Basically for 30 hours, the plutonium fires were burning, and they were actually, the forest around there turned red with dust, and people were sweeping their porches and their steps off of this radioactive dust. But eventually they were evacuated, and the area became quite hot for a long period of time. And the status of Pripyat right now is sort of a ghost town. The main hotel has birch trees growing out at the top of it. The school there is just a crumbled shell where they have moldy textbooks and old toys and wooden blocks still there as though the people just left. The legacy of the Russian-Soviet nuclear program, there's still echoes. There's actually a lake in the southern Ural Mountains where they were mining plutonium. The lake is so toxic, it's one of the most polluted places on the planet, that if you stand for 1 hour on the shore of that lake, 1 week later, you'll be dead from radiation poisoning. Well, one of the questions I oftentimes get asked is, what is the status of that number 4 reactor, the reactor that actually blew? Back in the past, they just basically covered it with a big concrete shell. It was called a sarcophagus, a rather creepy term for this shell. There are still 200 tons of radioactive plutonium and uranium still in there. Most of it's in a form of solidified lava. It's a molten fusion of uranium rods and concrete. There's pieces of the actual reactor still embedded in the wall of the facility. And it's beginning to crumble. Actually, water seeps into the sarcophagus. In the lower levels of the sarcophagus, there's actually sort of a radioactive soup from rainwater seeping through there. And so it's a disaster just waiting to happen. A strong wind could potentially, bring that whole thing down. Now, what they're doing now is an attempt, and this is literally just very current events. They're just finishing it up this summer. They're installing this fall, and it's a new shell they're going to encase the sarcophagus in. So they call it the shelter or the ark of life. It's basically a gigantic steel hangar, and by gigantic I mean it's 37 stories tall. It's tall enough that the Statue of Liberty could walk into it without ever her torch touching the top of it. It's the largest movable structure on the planet, and they're going to slide it on these huge rails over the old sarcophagus. It's so large, it's so cavernous on the inside that the engineers fear actually it might form clouds on the inside and rain on the inside of this thing. That's the project that they're going to attempt to, again, just try to permanently close and seal that old wound.